Tantor Audio presents Sex Outside the Lines, Authentic Sexuality in a Sexually Dysfunctional Culture by Chris Donaghue, Ph.D. Narrated by Michael Hinton. Think outside of the box. This is important if you want to make changes. Dr. Adrian J. Donaghue. One should always be in love. That is the reason one should never marry. Oscar Wilde. Nature is constructed, not discovered. Donna J. Haraway. The constraints imposed by social facts are invisible to us unless we actively try to resist them. Emile Durkheim. Once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. Marjorie Williams, The Velveteen Rabbit. When 100 men stand together, each of them loses his mind and gets another one. Friedrich Nietzsche. Introduction. We live in a world where sex is under attack. Though it's often been a cultural obsession through the ages, sex is constantly in our headlines, in the form of sex addiction, political sex scandals, high school kids sexting, college campus consent laws, and celebrity marriages, divorces, and cheating scandals. Sex has become a psychological police state, always under surveillance and framed as dangerous. The topic of sex, even clinically and within academia, carries a stigma. Sexologist Betty Dodson wryly pointed out that people who love and explore sex are no different from food connoisseurs, dedicated scientists, or other people who devote time to pursuing a particular interest. When I was an artist working long hours of painting, I was admired and rewarded. Once I became interested in spending my time pursuing sex, I was labeled nymphomaniac or, more recently, sex addict. A healthy sex education would be honest, maybe even transgressive in our current societal climate, and would encourage people to free themselves of the shame created by their sexual desires. The ultimate goal of sex education should be to free our minds and bodies for pleasurable exploration, not further oppression and damage. My own clinical and academic training, especially within the sex addiction field, was rife with attempts at social control. The sex addiction treatment model shames non-normative sex acts, pornography, and masturbation. Its goal is to water down sex and keep it within committed relationships only, calling anything else addiction. That's morality, not psychology. What I needed was a conversion from sex addiction, which is sex negative, to sexology, which is sex positive. I did not enter psychology and sexology to confine and control individuals via therapeutic oppression or to act as a judge, doling out punishment and shame. I entered this field to liberate people and to support their sustained health, both mental and physical. This book is about destabilizing the sexual norms of Western society. Sex addiction therapies, sexual harassment, and sexual disorder diagnoses all create a paralysis around empowered and authentic sexuality. I strive to liberate people by helping them create their own spaces for the kinds of sex they want to have. The goal of my work is to create space for more sexual relational options and visions of sexual health. Current self-designated experts allow their sex-hating narratives to cloud their critical thinking. It's easier to stick with the story that sex is shameful. Most therapists and psychiatrists have no formal sex therapy training, yet they work with couples and individuals on sexual dysfunction on a regular basis. We do not need to be more liberal within current concepts. We need to be more inventive by creating new sexual values that are sustainable and relevant to our current and future sexual relational systems. We must not allow our sex lives to be directed by sex-negative policing. Language is typically the first site of regulation and shaming. As Camille Paglia said, words must never be policed. Whatever good some people feel may be gained by restriction on speech, it is enormously outweighed by the damage done to any society where expression is restricted. This is especially true of sexual language, which is policed and prohibited in our society more than any other kind of expression, with the possible exception of hate speech. That comparison should illuminate how our culture truly views sex. To recover, a person must first acknowledge they have been sexually repressed or restrained, then learn what it means to move beyond that. We will know sex is free when sex work is safe and legal, sex addiction as a clinical issue no longer exists, and fetishes are not pathologized as unhealthy or something of which people need to be cured. Sex Outside the Lines works to rescue sex from the oppressive and violent place where it currently exists within psychological discourses, media presentations, institutional policing, and interpersonal practices. Our current knowledge, theories, and presentations of sex and relationships are created by people who are afraid of sexuality. These theories continue to hinder healthy sex and sustainable relationships. New models for sexuality and relationship are desperately needed, as evidenced by the statistical view of modern American society. Highest rate of singledom. High rate of divorce. In 50% of all relationships, one or both partners have cheated. The majority of U.S. households are unmarried households. The marriage rate has been declining for the past 100 years. More couples with kids cohabitating but not getting married. 45% of the adult population is unmarried. Unmarried women are the fastest growing demographic. Single women do more than 30% of adopting. All these problems stem from one thing: our societal fear of and distaste for sexuality. It's time to confront some facts. Marriage doesn't work for everyone and is no longer needed to signify love and commitment. Gender is no longer determining work or family roles, and singledom has increased in perceived value, all while psychology continues to shame these now typical behaviors as being sick. Sex Outside the Lines will help instill confidence in an authentic sexuality in our sexually dysfunctional culture by dismantling the outdated concepts of natural and normative. For example, queer ecology, with its acknowledgement of animals with same-sex partnerships, trans and intersex identities, polyamory, single parenting, and universal non-normative behaviors, devours and annihilates any concept of a natural way to be sexual. Compared to humanity, nature is both liberated and radical in its ideas of what is normal. When you learn to have sex without limits, you will open yourself up to more options for sexuality and relationships, the ability to challenge current sexual categories, and finally, a liberation of your sexuality from shame. Authentic sexuality means that normal is not the goal. Chapter 1. Liberate Sex and Get Naked. When it comes to sex, normal is not the goal. In sex and relationships, normal is a dirty word. It's psychologically offensive and needs to be removed from our sexual lexicon. The definition of normal is formed by Western, white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied, upper-class individuals, and it works to enforce heterosexuality, monogamy, intercourse-based sexuality, pro-family and pro-marriage views, and neurotypical cisgendered bodies. If you don't fit into all of those categories, you're not normal, and there's nothing you can do about it. Normal sex stereotypically involves heterosexual, married, monogamous, procreative, non-commercial, in pairs, in a relationship, same generation, in private, no pornography, bodies only vanilla. Normal is nothing short of a derogatory term, and it should be avoided at all costs within sexuality and relationships, and elsewhere in life too. The concept of normalcy is designed to subjugate people who have the wrong bodies, or sexual interests, or body types, etc. It is psychologically offensive and needs to be extinguished, no longer used as a reference point to determine mental or sexual relational health. Normal is the death of highly pleasurable sex. The normal path is very narrow and built from a heteronormative, pro-family, intercourse-centric perspective. Labels such as slut, sex addict, and low sexual desire are used to police sexual behavior that doesn't fit perfectly into what those in charge believe the vast majority of people are doing. These labels are born out of our culture's sex-negative attitude and must be stopped. A common definition for unacceptable sex is sex through distance, through pain, sex with things, with too few or too many others, with wrong body parts, within similar gendered groups. But the limits on what is normal by that definition disallow for the sexualities of those who are or have disabilities, obese, anorexic, depressed, cognitively or affectively disabled, homeless, impoverished. The concepts of normal and healthy sex always align themselves with normative trajectories of both sexual relational development and appropriate ways of being. In contemporary Western cultures, one who deviates from this path is not merely a pervert. One can also be diagnosed with sexual compulsivity, gender dysphoria, masochism, sadism, obsessive-compulsive disorder, paraphilia, or addiction, or, in common parlance, one is unhealthy, unstable, oversexed, sick. Your marker of good health should never be to have normal sex. Normal is not the goal. Normal is a statistical average that ignores the diversity in life and sex and attempts to neutralize exceptionality and creativity. Norms are the status quo. They dilute the most arousing parts of our sexuality and sexual behavior and related arousal. People are routinely convinced that they are emotionally unbalanced because of their sexuality and relational styles when all parts of your sexuality and arousal patterns are acceptable and should carry no shame. The more we allow ourselves to engage with everything that arouses us, the more our sense of sexual shame and the related isolation diminishes. Normal is held in place by privilege. The gay marriage debate exemplifies the flawed idea of assimilation, or extending the privilege, as a solution for an oppression caused by the institutionalization of sex and relationships. A completely open system for marriage is a basic human right, but merely allowing more people to marry still maintains a system of dominance and exclusivity and does not remove privilege for certain types of people and forms of relationships. Instead, the dominant ideology, system, or institution needs to be eliminated altogether. Its maintenance means that other minority individuals are still left disenfranchised and faced with discrimination. Extending the scope of what encompasses normal and healthy is not the solution. Sexual elitism, that is, thinking that your sexuality is the only right or just sexuality while oppressing the sexualities of others, is simply prejudice dressed up in another form. How our culture debases sex. The goal of being sexually healthy is one of living and thinking in a sex-positive way. Being sex-positive means not demeaning or pathologizing anyone's sexual choices, interests, or expressions. It means not placing monogamy or marriage above open or casual relationships, or saying that kinky sex is better or more honest than vanilla sex. Sexual activism, sexual health, and sex positivity are about a perspective and a lifestyle of not perpetuating or creating norms, or policing the borders of what is acceptable when sex is consensual, non-damaging, and pleasurable. Being sex-positive means you're open, flexible, and non-judgmental about your sexual preferences. It also means allowing your partners to feel the same way without shaming them. I work with far too many cases where couples enter therapy deeming a certain preference problematic. "It's not normal" is a common lament. Often people don't encourage sexual creativity in their partners, instead looking to notions of normal to define boundaries. Attempts to marry and monogamize a sexual partner stem from the anxious drive to regulate anxiety, not from what's emotionally healthy. Sexual integrity means living in ways that honor what arouses you and are consistent with your own chosen value system, not a system you may have inherited from mainstream culture, psychology, religion, law, or the media. These outliers or rebels, those having sex outside the lines designated by mainstream culture and its experts, exemplify the template for sustainable and healthy sexuality. Exhibiting a different sexual development trajectory doesn't mean you're troubled. Relational sex and partnered sex have been touted as dominant cultural psychological ideals, but this doesn't make them healthy or appropriate for everyone. There is a psychological brilliance in those who do not internalize cultural norms and instead create their own paths of growth. Far too many people accept the sexual relational myths of mainstream society as soon as they begin dating and becoming sexual, without questioning the validity of or need for any of them. This closed system lacks intelligent critical analysis and keeps people trapped and under the control of our dominant sex-negative culture. Sexual appropriateness and socially sanctioned boundaries of what can be spoken of, questioned, and enacted are ruled by the social process of conformity. We have to culturally determine what is considered sexual, which body parts are found sexual, and what their social meanings are. As innate as sexuality seems, our socialization and social constructions overpower our biology and evolutionary drives. Demarcating only genitals as being sexual, for example, ignores the vast geography of our bodies and consequently limits our sex. Our entire bodies are sexual and hold the possibility of pleasure. Framing sex as private only limits public sexual expression and relational health. All parts of our bodies are both sexual and non-sexual simultaneously and consistently. Defining sexual language and anatomical verbiage as inappropriate shuts down communication and builds needless shame, while also distancing individuals from their bodies. The sexual realm is deeply impacted by languaging. Words deeply shame how people experience their own sexuality and the sexualities of others. Those who are afraid of sex use anti-sex language and silence pro-sex expression, damaging others because they are damaged themselves. Eating and sex are both bodily functions. They're both satisfying and gratifying. They both feed the soul. But suddenly, because of our conditioning, one has this sociable aspect to it, and the other has to be kept quiet, ignored, and hidden in the corner. We will know we have moved beyond a childish approach to sexuality when we no longer label certain words as sexually inappropriate. Verbal policing leads to the demise of sexual confidence and intelligence. Erotic intelligence involves the ability to confidently speak about sexuality, both openly and honestly. Immature sexuality uses euphemisms or avoidance, or designates arousal-specific dialogue as private. Having low erotic intelligence means hiding your sexuality socially and publicly. The dehumanizing concept of sexual privilege, where some sexual behaviors are arbitrarily deemed better or healthier than others, reduces the diversity and possibility of long-term partnered sex and sexual happiness. What we as a society label sexually normal kills arousal and is the trigger for sexual and relational boredom. Deviance and stigma. We as a culture treat sexual behaviors that are not within the norm as sexually deviant. Deviance as a label is about socially created expectations and not about an individual's psychology. In terms of sexuality, deviance is the sign of sexual confidence and health. What I call sexual relational rebels are evolved individuals fighting against a culture that limits sexual freedom, health, and expression. The idea of deviance is not something intrinsic to an individual. Deviance and abnormality are socially defined by groups and individuals in power. Deviance should be considered a badge of individuation and honor. Another way society controls how we think about sex is by stigmatizing it. Stigma is created when we shame certain behaviors and thoughts. Often this is an attempt by those too afraid to acknowledge what they are aroused by or fear in others. A common form of sexual stigmatizing is slut-shaming, or using a person's sexual or relational past to demean them. This is a form of sexual projection where the slut is made to bear the anxiety that the accuser cannot contain. The issue is not the sexual preference or sexuality of an individual, but instead the inequalities, negative attitudes, misrepresentations, and institutional practices that result from the process of stigmatization. Our anti-nudity and public sex laws are products of this same misguided thinking. I will control your behavior because I cannot control my anxieties and emotions. Here's the problem. Too often, neurological and biological diversity are seen as flaws and deformities to be normalized, corrected, and fixed. This form of modern-day eugenics is an attempt to regulate socially defined abnormal bodies as inferior and unworthy of existence. There is a broad array of cultural norms that privilege an illusory ideal mind and body at the expense of actual bodies of all shapes and sizes. This applies to sex and relationships where psychiatry and psychology use the same erroneous medical model to correct alternative ways of being and relating. Alternative bodies and brains are no more disabled or abnormal than alternative sexualities, identities, or relational styles. The existence of disability as an identifier or category strengthens the medical and psychological industry's control and abuse of non-normative and alternative bodies and minds. The new cultures and terms like neuroqueer and neuroatypical, terms from autistics and other psychologically stigmatized groups who are now challenging the concept that they are disordered, allow what was once a designated minority community to declassify themselves from social stigma that disempowered and dehumanized them. Diagnoses consistently change due to current social mores and politics, demonstrating their flimsy and arbitrary nature. Calling something deviant or attaching a stigma to it leads to the diagnosing of alternative and different psychologies as unhealthy or broken. Most sexual diagnosing shames people interested in sexual relational creativity and behavioral nonconformity. Arousing and healthy sexuality requires the very behaviors and fantasies that our sex-phobic institutions and culture want to annihilate. It's ironic that in a society that eagerly devours sexual self-help articles and books and attends sex therapy, novelty and diversity are routinely dismissed or attached with negative stigmas. Social control and conformity are strengthened by individual acts, like referring to certain sexual behaviors as normal or labeling and shaming others as abnormal. Sexual preferences need to be rescued from oppressive labels like fetish or paraphilia. We all have the right to our chosen sexuality, as sex is the right to selfhood. Shaming sex shames the self. Truly healthy sex is a personal choice divorced from inherited morals and the values of the current culture, including experts and their laws, which can instead enforce a powerful taboo against direct representation of erotic activities. While the Constitution doesn't mention sexual freedom, sexual rights, or sexual protection, the ACLU is an example of a group that works tirelessly to defend sexual rights and expression. Sexual health requires both open dialogue and freedom of expression, and this will, in our sex-phobic culture, make many people anxious. But we cannot allow sex to be censored and silenced simply because it scares some people. Emotional comfort is the death of sexuality and arousal, and so the battle continues. Obscenity laws work to undermine all this, as they allow for arbitrary sex regulation, which endangers free expression. Unfettered discussion about sex still suffers second-class status. What's needed is a form of erotic justice where both sexual shaming and privileging are prohibited. Erotic justice carries with it the goal of not having external regulators controlling our bodies and our sexuality. Examples of how our personal sexual power has been stolen include sex for profit being illegal, Plan B not being available over the counter, decisions about whom and how we marry being made for us, and sex magically being made okay and healthy just by signing a marital contract. The most important psychosexual component of erotic justice is living in a shame-free environment. People who are brought up feeling guilty and ashamed about their sexuality do not feel positive about themselves and cannot relate comfortably to people in other areas as well. The existence of any shame limits an individual's freedom of thought and choice. Identifying only with predetermined identities and behaviors leaves out myriad alternative sexual and relational selves, including behaviors, desires, and fantasies. This distances the self from itself, the self from the other, and the self from the world. Sexuality is a socially created construct, and as such it is sensitive and subject to all current cultural dilemmas and struggles. We are born with a sexual response system and drive, but understanding our sexuality, knowledge, theories, and presentations of sex and relationships, and the idea that we are responding to sex naturally or neutrally is far from reality. We are all socialized as to how we should view sexuality and relationships, and we are provided culturally sanctioned models for how to have sex in a healthy way. Ironically, these models are constantly replaced with new paradigms of normal eclipsing past ones. Sex workers will save us. A culture's social value system or morality generally communicates more about that society than it does about those whom that society has labeled deviant. Foucault saw the body as an inscribed surface of events, traced by language. This speaks to how our bodies and related sexuality are created by history and culture, and are infused with representational dynamics due to the languaging we use to invent and manage ourselves. It's an internalized colonization of the externalized references of functionality. Sexuality and body are both cultural creations that are managed and sustained by our policing of their boundaries. We use terms such as appropriate, harassment, and deviant to define what is healthy and what is a disorder or a crime. These words are merely constructs, lacking consistent and clear definitions. What is determined to be sexually deviant differs depending on the culture and time period. Where should one look to explore what is healthy or appropriate, sexually or relationally? Sex-shaming labels like porn, stripper, sex addict, and prostitute are signs of our society's continued sex phobia. Negatively framing these forms of sexuality demonstrates our culturally anxious and fear-based relationship with sex. A sexually healthy culture would integrate and support these diverse and highly arousing concepts. These outlets are a counterbalance to our sex-negative world. We will know we have evolved sexually when these forms are no longer pathologized and shamed. Pornography, sex work, and labels such as sex addiction expose our culture to itself, showing us a detailed blueprint of the culture's.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?